My grandmother bribed my girlfriend's parents to move across the country, deleted her social media, and called me unnatural for crying over her. When I begged her to stop and said I loved Jade, she smiled and said, "You'll thank me once the baby's inside you." I didn't say a word. That was 2 years ago. Last night, she locked herself in the prison chapel bathroom and cried so quietly I almost missed it. When I was 16, I found a wedding dress in my size hidden in my parents' closet, along with a marriage license already filled out for me and my 34-year-old cousin Daniel, who couldn't walk or speak. My grandmother had moved Daniel into our home when I was 12 after a construction accident left him paralyzed and unable to speak, though his mind stayed sharp behind eyes that followed every conversation. Before his accident, he'd been the cool older cousin who taught me guitar. Now he was trapped in a broken body. Daniel and I were still pretty close despite his physical limitations. Little did I know my grandmother had been watching our bond since Daniel's accident and twisted it into something horrific that would ruin both of our lives. I'd been looking for my birth certificate when I found the box. Inside was a silk wedding dress with a note, "For Sophie's blessed union, June 2025, my 18th birthday." Under it were legal documents appointing me as Daniel's permanent caregiver and a marriage license with his signature in shaky handwriting. Mom walked in while I held the papers. "Grandma said you'd find those eventually," she said quietly. Daniel didn't want to sign it, but we convinced him it was for the best. At dinner, Grandma explained I'd be homeschooled from now on to focus on my wifely training, while Daniel sat rigid in his wheelchair. "2 years to prepare you properly," she said. The thought of marrying my own cousin made me want to vomit. I wasn't even interested in men, let alone this man who'd carried me on his shoulders at the county fair when I was 5, and now couldn't even use the bathroom unassisted. And I was supposed to share his bed and have his babies. The training started immediately. Every morning, Grandma made me bathe Daniel, dress him, and feed him breakfast while she took photos. She'd coo about what a beautiful couple we made while Daniel stared at the wall. When I tried to refuse, she'd grip my wrist. "Would you rather see Daniel in some horrible state facility? Because that's where he'll go if you don't cooperate." I told my girlfriend Jade everything, begging for help, telling her she was the only person I wanted to be with. 3 days later, her family suddenly moved away. Her phone was disconnected, her social media deleted. When I confronted Grandma, she smiled. Unnatural influences have no place in a godly home. She'd bribed Jade's parents to get out of town and cut me off completely, tearing me away from the only person who made me feel normal, who reminded me that wanting to kiss girls instead of my paralyzed cousin wasn't wrong. I tried telling my school counselor, but Grandma had already painted me as a devoted saint volunteering to marry Daniel. I went to the police, but Grandma had created a file documenting my mental health struggles and obsession with Daniel. Each failed attempt made Grandma tighten control. She moved Daniel's medical bed into my room. She installed cameras. She brought in a fertility specialist to examine me while Daniel had to watch. That night, I heard him crying, deep, hopeless sobs. The next day, I swallowed a bottle of pills, but Grandma found me and had my stomach pumped privately. "Accept your purpose and the pain stops." When I woke up, Daniel was holding my hand at my beside. He used his eyes on his communication board to tell me, "I'm so sorry." 6 months before the wedding, I made one last desperate attempt. I contacted Jade through a library computer using some old email of hers I was praying was still active and begged her to meet me at the bus station. But Grandma was waiting in my room with 2 large men. "Did you think I don't have eyes everywhere?" she asked. "These gentlemen specialize in helping confused young women find their way back to God." The Utah facility was a nightmare. Locked rooms and Bible study. They showed me photos of Daniel looking thinner each day. "Your selfishness is hurting him," they said. When they brought me home 2 weeks later, they told me the wedding was tomorrow. Daniel had lost 20 pounds and wouldn't meet my eyes. That night, Grandma laid out my wedding dress and lingerie while explaining what would happen on my wedding night. "The fertility treatment start immediately," she said. "Within a year, you'll give Daniel his first child, your own cousin's baby growing inside you." She left me alone with the dress. In 12 hours, I'd walk down the aisle to marry my cousin and become his nurse for the rest of our lives. I'd spend my wedding night in his bed while Grandma monitored from the next room, and one of her cronies manipulated his body on top of mine. My girlfriend was gone, my parents were cowards, and Daniel and I were both prisoners. I held the wedding dress against myself in the mirror. Tomorrow, I'd be 18. Tomorrow, I'd become Mrs. Daniel Walker, my cousin's wife, trapped forever in a house where love meant letting your own blood relative touch you however God demanded. And I started thinking, dead girls don't feel their cousin's hands on their body. Dead girls don't have to carry babies that will be born wrong because their parents share grandparents. Dead girls don't have to pretend this is love when it's really just incest wrapped in prayer. Maybe that's my only way out. I stared at myself in that mirror for what felt like hours. The white silk against my skin making me want to tear it all off and run. But where would I go? Grandma had eyes everywhere, and Daniel needed me. Even if this whole situation made me sick, I couldn't abandon him to some state facility where they'd treat him like a vegetable. The door creaked open. Daniel wheeled himself in using the controls on his chair, something he rarely did anymore. His eyes moved frantically to his communication board, spelling out letters one by one. D-O-N-T. I turned to face him, still holding the dress. His face looked gaunt, cheekbones sharp under paper-thin skin. The weight loss made him look even more fragile than usual. He continued spelling. P-L-A-N. My heart raced. Plan? What plan? I moved closer, kneeling beside his chair so we were eye level. His eyes darted toward the door, then back to his board. T-O-M-O-R-R-O-W. T-R-U-S-T. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. I quickly hung the dress back up and pretended to straighten the lingerie Grandma had laid out, fighting the urge to vomit. Daniel's chair whirred as he backed toward the door. Grandma appeared, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Daniel, dear, you shouldn't be in Sophie's room this late. Save your energy for tomorrow." She gripped his chair handles and steered him out before he could spell anything else. I lay awake all night thinking about his message. Trust him tomorrow? During the wedding? What could he possibly do? He couldn't speak, could barely move his hands, but the desperation in his eyes had been real. Morning came too fast. Grandma burst in at dawn with her prayer circle. 5 women from church who cooed over me while forcing me into the dress. They curled my hair, painted my face, all while reciting Bible verses about wives submitting to their husbands. One of them, Mrs. Henderson, kept talking about how blessed I was to have such a godly purpose. Mom appeared briefly, avoiding my eyes as she placed a pearl necklace around my neck. "Your father's waiting in the car," she whispered, then fled before I could respond. The church was small, just family and Grandma's inner circle, maybe 30 people total, all complicit in this nightmare. I walked down that aisle on my father's arm, each step feeling like walking toward my own execution. Daniel sat at the altar in his best suit, his wheelchair decorated with white ribbons like some sick parody of a wedding car. Pastor Williams smiled warmly, as if this was perfectly normal, as if marrying your paralyzed cousin at gunpoint was just another Tuesday in God's plan. He began the ceremony, his voice echoing in the small space. When he asked if anyone objected, Daniel's hand twitched, just slightly, but I saw it. His eyes moved rapidly, and suddenly his communication board fell from his lap, clattering on the floor. As I bent to pick it up, I saw something taped to the back, a folded paper. My hands shook as I grabbed it, slipping it into my bouquet while pretending to adjust the flowers. Grandma's eyes narrowed from the front pew, but she couldn't stop the ceremony now without causing a scene. Pastor Williams continued droning on about holy matrimony, while I unfolded the paper behind my flowers. Daniel's shaky handwriting filled the page. "When he asks you to say I do, I will have a seizure. Real one. Ambulance comes. Hospital. They'll find the substances she's been giving me. Evidence hidden in my chair. Both free." My eyes snapped to his. He blinked once, slowly. Confirmation. question. The substances. Of course. How else could Grandma keep a grown man compliant? How else could she forge his signature? Daniel had been planning this, fighting through whatever sedatives she pumped into him to write that note, to hide evidence. Sophie, Pastor Williams said, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I looked at Daniel, his jaw clenched, neck muscles straining, his eyes rolled back, and his body began convulsing violently in the chair. The seizure looked terrifyingly real, foam gathering at his mouth as his limbs jerked uncontrollably. Grandma screamed, rushing forward. Not now, not during the ceremony, but others were already calling 911. Mrs. Henderson tried to hold Daniel's head still while Mom frantically fanned him with a hymnal. The small church erupted in chaos. The paramedics arrived within minutes, though it felt like hours. They immediately started checking Daniel's vitals, one of them frowning at his medical bracelet. Ma'am, what medications is he on? Grandma rattled off a list, but the paramedics' frown deepened. These substances, several of these shouldn't be mixed. And these doses, what's really going on with Daniel's supposed signature on those papers if he can barely move his hands? The timing of finding that dress right when Sophie needs her birth certificate seems oddly convenient, and I'm curious about how Grandma managed to get everyone. He turned to his partner. We need to get him to the hospital now. As they loaded Daniel onto a gurney, his hand fell open. A small USB drive tumbled out, rolling across the church floor. I dove for it, snatching it up before Grandma could see. I'm riding with him, I announced, still in my wedding dress. The ceremony, Grandma sputtered. We can finish when he's stable. He's my cousin, I said loudly, making sure everyone heard. My cousin needs medical attention. Several people shifted uncomfortably. Maybe they'd been able to ignore the incest when it was dressed up in white silk and Bible verses, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real. The hospital waiting room felt like freedom after months of captivity. I clutched the USB drive, wondering what evidence Daniel had managed to collect. A nurse approached after an hour, her face grave. Are you family? His cousin, I said firmly. Just his cousin. She nodded slowly. The doctors found some concerning things in his blood work. Multiple sedatives, some at dangerous levels. We've had to contact the authorities. Grandma arrived then, Pastor Williams at her side. This is all a misunderstanding, she began, but the nurse cut her off. Ma'am, we'll need to speak with whoever has been administering his medications. I stood up, still in my wedding dress, but feeling stronger than I had in years. That would be my grandmother. She's been drugging him. I have evidence. I held up the USB drive. The next few hours blurred together. Police arrived. Social workers. Adult protective services. The USB drive contained audio recordings Daniel had somehow managed to make, documenting Grandma discussing the substances, the forced marriage, everything. He'd been fighting back the only way he could, gathering evidence while pretending to be completely helpless. They arrested Grandma right there in the hospital waiting room. She kept insisting this was God's plan, that she was saving us both. The officer reading her rights looked disgusted. Mom broke down crying, finally admitting she'd been terrified of Grandma for years. Dad just sat there staring at his hands. The rest of the family scattered like roaches when the lights came on. A social worker named Marcus sat with me, explaining my options. At 18, I was free to leave. They'd found Jade's family, confirmed Grandma had paid them $50,000 to relocate. That money could be recovered. Charges could be filed. What about Daniel? I asked. He'll need significant medical supervision while they wean him off the substances safely. After that, he'll be evaluated for appropriate care facilities or independent living support. Marcus paused. He's been asking for you. Would you like to see him? I found Daniel in a hospital bed, looking more alert than he had in months. His communication board was propped up beside him, and his eyes immediately went to work. THANKYOU. I shook my head. You saved us both. He spelled slowly, deliberately. NOTYOURFAULT. The tears came then, months of fear and disgust and trapped helplessness pouring out. Daniel's hand moved slightly, and I took it gently. Not as his bride, not as his caretaker, but as his cousin. Just his cousin. I'm going to find Jade, I told him. And you're going to get real help, real care. No more substances, no more forced signatures. His eyes crinkled slightly, as close to a smile as he could manage. GOLIVE. I squeezed his hand once more, then walked out of that hospital room. Still wearing the wedding dress, I made my way to the exit. Tomorrow I'd figure out how to rebuild my life, how to find Jade, how to heal from this nightmare. But today, for the first time in 2 years, I was free. The automatic doors opened to reveal a world that suddenly seemed full of possibility. No more cameras in my room, no more forced baths, no more fertility specialists or Bible verses twisted into weapons. Just me, Sophie, 18 years old, and finally free to love who I wanted, live how I wanted, free to be more than someone's imprisoned bride. I walked into that June afternoon, leaving the wedding dress behind with everything else they'd tried to force on me. The sun felt warm on my face, and for the first time in years, I smiled, really smiled. Daniel would recover, Grandma would face justice, and somewhere out there, Jade was waiting. I had some living to catch up on. I stepped out of the hospital into the bright June afternoon, still wearing that cursed wedding dress. The fabric rustled with each step, reminding me of everything I'd escaped. My first instinct was to tear it off right there in the parking lot, but I had nowhere else to go except back to that house. The taxi driver gave me a strange look when I climbed in wearing full bridal attire, mascara streaking down my cheeks. I gave him my parents' address, then changed my mind halfway there. I couldn't face that house yet, not with Grandma's presence still haunting every corner. Instead, I directed him to the local thrift store. Inside, I grabbed the first clothes I could find, jeans and a plain t-shirt. The cashier, a woman about Mom's age, took in my wedding dress and tear-stained face. She rang up my items without asking questions, then quietly slipped a packet of tissues across the counter. Small kindnesses felt enormous after months of cruelty. I changed in their cramped bathroom, stuffing the wedding dress into the trash. The jeans were too big and the shirt had a coffee stain, but they felt like armor compared to that silk prison. I splashed cold water on my face, washing away the carefully applied makeup from this morning's preparation ritual. My phone had been confiscated months ago, so I used the store's phone to call the one number I'd memorized, my Aunt Steph's. She lived 2 hours away and had stopped visiting after Grandma banned her for questioning the marriage arrangement. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. I explained everything in rushed sentences, and she immediately offered to drive down and get me. While waiting, I sat on the curb outside, watching normal people live normal lives. A couple walked by holding hands, and I thought of Jade. Somewhere out there, she was living without me, probably thinking I'd abandoned her. Aunt Steph's car pulled up 40 minutes later. She took one look at me and pulled me into a fierce hug. I broke down completely, sobbing into her shoulder while she rubbed my back. She didn't ask questions during the drive to her apartment, just let me cry myself empty. Her spare room became my sanctuary. That first night, I barely slept, jumping at every sound, certain Grandma would somehow appear. But morning came without incident. Aunt Steph made pancakes and told me I could stay as long as I needed. She'd already called in sick to work to help me figure out next steps. We spent the day making lists. Things I needed. Clothes, identification documents, a phone, things to figure out, school, money, finding Jade. Aunt Steph drove me back to the house while my parents were at work. I packed quickly, grabbing essentials while she stood guard. The cameras in my room were still recording, their red lights blinking like accusatory eyes. I found my birth certificate and social security card hidden in Mom's jewelry box. My laptop was gone, probably destroyed, but I grabbed my old phone from the junk drawer. It was dead, but maybe it could be charged. Every minute in that house felt like a year. Back at Aunt Steph's, I plugged in the phone and waited. When it finally powered on, I had dozens of missed messages from months ago. Most were from Jade, increasingly desperate, then nothing. Her last message message simply read, "I'll wait for you." I tried calling her number, but it was disconnected. Her social media accounts were all deleted. I searched for her parents' business online and found they'd relocated to Oregon. No forwarding address, no contact information. Grandma had been thorough in erasing her from my life. The next few days blurred together. I enrolled in online classes to finish high school. Aunt Steph helped me open a bank account and get a part-time job at a local bookstore. I threw myself into creating a new life, but the trauma followed me everywhere. I'd panic when older women entered the bookstore. I couldn't stand the smell of the perfume Grandma wore. 2 weeks after the failed wedding, Mom showed up at Aunt Steph's door. She looked haggard, clutching her purse like a shield. Aunt Steph made her wait on the porch while she asked if I wanted to see her. I almost said no, but something in me needed to hear what she had to say. Mom sat across from me at Aunt Steph's kitchen table, unable to meet my eyes. She explained that Grandma had moved out, furious about the legal troubles. Dad was staying with his brother. The house felt empty, she said, like all the life had been sucked out of it. She pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table. Inside was $5,000 in cash. "It's from your college fund," she whispered. Grandma doesn't know about it. I stared at the money, then at her. She'd stood by while Grandma tortured me, while they planned to marry me to my cousin. But here she was, trying to help in her own broken way. I took the envelope without thanking her. She didn't deserve thanks, but I needed the money. After she left, I used some of the cash to hire a private investigator to find Jade. It felt like something from a movie, but I was desperate. The investigator, a middle-aged woman named Benj, took my case without judgment. She promised to be discreet. Meanwhile, I visited Daniel every few days at the hospital. The doctors were slowly weaning him off the cocktail of substances Grandma had been feeding him. His communication improved dramatically. During one visit, he spelled out a longer message. SHEGAVEMEDRUGSFORYEARSMADEMEWORSE. The implications made me sick. I'm really curious about how Daniel managed to make those recordings while being so heavily drugged. His communication board spelling must take such focus. How did he secretly operate a recording device when he could barely move? Grandma hadn't just drugged him for the marriage. She'd been keeping him dependent since his accident. Daniel's recovery might have been possible years ago if she hadn't interfered. He could have regained more function, maybe even some speech. She'd stolen that from him to keep him helpless. I shared this information with the social worker, Marcus, who added it to the growing case against Grandma. He told me she was out on bail, staying with distant relatives. There was a restraining order preventing her from contacting Daniel or me, but paper hadn't stopped her before. 3 weeks into my new life, I was working at the bookstore when a familiar face walked in, Mrs. Henderson, from Grandma's prayer circle. My hands shook as she approached the counter. She looked older somehow, deflated without Grandma's commanding presence beside her. She set a book on the counter, some self-help title about forgiveness. As I rang it up, she leaned forward. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "We all knew it was wrong, but your grandmother, she had a way of making wrong seem right." I handed her the receipt without responding. She hesitated, then added, "There are others who feel the same. Not everyone in that church agreed with her." After she left, I thought about her words. How many people had stood by, uncomfortable but silent, while Grandma orchestrated this nightmare? How many had chosen compliance over conscience? Benj called a month after I'd hired her. She'd found Jade's family in Portland. They were running a small restaurant, trying to start over. Jade was working there, had deferred college for a year. Benj had managed to get Jade's new phone number. I stared at the digits she'd given me for hours before finding the courage to call. My hands trembled as I dialed. It rang once, twice, then, "Hello?" Her voice hit me like a physical force. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "Hello?" she repeated, and I heard the confusion in her tone. "It's me," I finally managed. Silence. Then, "Sophie?" Her voice broke on my name. I told her everything in a rush. The forced wedding, Daniel's plan, Grandma's arrest, my escape. She listened without interrupting, and I heard her crying quietly on the other end. When I finished, she told me her side. Grandma had shown up at their house with a check and threats. She'd researched Jade's father's immigration status, found a years-old discrepancy in his paperwork. One phone call to the right people, and he'd be deported. Take the money and leave, or lose everything. I wanted to fight, Jade said, but my parents were terrified. We left that night. We talked for 3 hours, catching up on lost months, planning a reunion. She couldn't leave Portland yet. Her family needed her at the restaurant, but I could visit. Aunt Steph helped me book a bus ticket for the following weekend. The night before my trip, I visited Daniel one last time. He was in physical therapy now, slowly regaining strength. The therapist said he might walk again with enough work. His speech therapist was optimistic too. The substances had suppressed his recovery, not destroyed it permanently. He spelled out GOSEEHERBEHAPPY. I promised to visit when I got back. He managed a slight smile, the first real one I'd seen since his accident. It gave me hope that maybe we could both rebuild our lives. The bus ride to Portland took 12 hours. I spent them staring out the window, watching the landscape change, feeling the distance grow between me and everything Grandma had tried to force on me. Each mile felt like shedding another layer of trauma. Jade met me at the bus station. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, and she'd lost weight. But when she smiled, she was still my Jade. We hugged for so long that other passengers had to walk around us. She smelled the same, like vanilla, and something uniquely her. Her family's restaurant was small but busy. Her parents greeted me cautiously, unsure how to act around the girl whose family had driven them from their home. But Jade's mom eventually hugged me, whispering that she was sorry for leaving me behind. That weekend was bittersweet. Being with Jade felt like coming home, but we both carried scars from our separation. She had nightmares about Grandma finding them. I still flinched when anyone mentioned marriage. We were the same people, but trauma had changed us both. On my last night, Jade's father pulled me aside. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $30,000. "Your grandmother's money," he said. "We don't want it." I tried to refuse, but he insisted. "Use it to build your life. Go to college. Be free." The bus ride home felt different. I had money now, enough to truly start over. I had Jade back in my life, even if distance separated us. Daniel was recovering. Grandma was facing justice. The pieces were falling into place, but I should have known Grandma wouldn't give up easily. I'd been back at Aunt Steph's for 3 days when the first sign appeared, a note under the apartment door. "God's plan cannot be thwarted." No signature, but I recognized the handwriting from years of birthday cards. Aunt Steph wanted to call the police, but what could they do? It was just a note. We installed new locks, a security system. I varied my routes to work, stayed vigilant, but Grandma had spent years building her network. She had eyes everywhere. The second message came through the bookstore. A customer handed me an envelope, said a nice older lady had asked her to deliver it. Inside was a photo of Daniel in his hospital bed, taken from outside his window. On the back, "He still needs you." This time we did call the police. They increased patrols around the hospital, but Grandma was too smart to get caught directly violating the restraining order. She worked through intermediaries, people still loyal to her twisted vision. Marcus called with updates on the legal case. Grandma's lawyer was arguing religious freedom, claiming she'd been trying to provide for Daniel's care through traditional marriage. Some of the charges might not stick. She could get probation instead of jail time. The thought of Grandma free made my skin crawl. I started having nightmares again, waking up convinced she was in the room. Aunt Steph found me sleeping in the closet one morning, curled up like a child hiding from monsters. I threw myself into work and online classes, trying to outrun the fear. I video called Jade every night, drawing strength from her presence even through a screen. She was saving money, planning to move back when she could. Her parents had agreed. They missed their old life, and Grandma's reach didn't extend to Oregon. 6 weeks after the failed wedding, I was closing the bookstore alone when the lights went out. My heart hammered as I fumbled for my phone's flashlight. The backup generator should have kicked in, but nothing happened. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. Not Grandma, too tall, too broad. One of her church friends, a man whose name I'd never learned. He didn't speak, just stood there blocking my exit. I backed toward the rear entrance, but another shadow appeared there. Two of them working together. My phone had no signal. They must have brought a jammer. Grandma had learned from her mistakes. No direct involvement, no evidence trail. The men advanced slowly, and I grabbed the heaviest book I could find. Stay back! My voice shook, but I tried to sound fierce. The first man held up his hands peacefully. We're just here to talk. Your grandmother wants you to know she forgives you. I don't want her forgiveness. She's worried about you. Living in sin, abandoning your family duties. She wants to help you find your way back to God. They kept advancing, herding me toward the center of the store. I thought about screaming, but the streets were empty this late. Who would hear me? Daniel needs you, the second man said. He's not doing well without proper care. He's doing better without her substances. They exchanged glances. The first man sighed. Your grandmother tried to do this gently, but if you won't come willingly. He lunged forward. I swung the book, catching him in the temple. He staggered back, cursing. The second man grabbed for me, but I ducked under his arm and ran for the front door. It was locked. Of course it was locked. I'd locked it myself an hour ago. My hands fumbled with the deadbolt while footsteps pounded behind me. The lock finally turned, and I burst out onto the street. I ran harder than I'd ever run, my work shoes slapping against pavement. Behind me, a car engine roared to life. They were following. I ducked into an alley, then another, using my knowledge of the neighborhood to lose them. Finally, I crouched behind a dumpster, trying to quiet my gasping breaths. The car drove past slowly, searching. When I was sure they were gone, I called 911 from a nearby payphone. The police took my statement, but without evidence, there wasn't much they could do. The bookstore security footage had been mysteriously corrupted. The men were gone without a trace. Aunt Steph was frantic when I finally got home. We packed that night, throwing essentials into her car. If Grandma was escalating, we couldn't stay. But where could we go that she wouldn't find us? The answer came from an unexpected source. Marcus called the next morning with news. Daniel had made a decision. He was using his settlement money from the construction accident to move across the country for specialized rehabilitation. He wanted to know if I'd consider being his medical advocate, not his caretaker, just someone to ensure his wishes were respected. He specifically said he wants to get as far from your grandmother as possible, Marcus explained. There's a facility in Seattle with an excellent program. Seattle, 3,000 miles from Grandma. Close enough to Portland that I could see Jade regularly. Far enough that Grandma's network would have gaps. Daniel's therapy progress sounds almost too convenient after years of being drugged. Bodies don't usually bounce back that quickly from long-term damage. But I'm curious what those doctors really think about his chances. I accepted immediately. Aunt Steph decided to come too. Her job allowed remote work, and she'd grown protective of me. We spent the next week preparing for the cross-country move, keeping our plans secret. The night before we left, I visited my parents one last time. The house looked different, smaller somehow, like Grandma's presence had physically shrunk it. Mom hugged me at the door, and this time I hugged back. I'm leaving, I told them. Far away, I won't tell you where. Dad nodded slowly. He looked older, defeated. It's probably for the best. Mom pressed another envelope into my hands, from both of us, to help you start over. I wanted to be angry at them, to refuse their money like I'd refused their apologies, but I was tired of anger. I took the envelope and left without looking back. Daniel and I flew to Seattle together, him with a medical transport team, me and Coach. I watched out the window as the country passed below, each mile taking us further from Grandma's reach. Daniel couldn't see the view, but I described it to him, spelling out words on his communication board when the nurses weren't looking. The Seattle facility was nothing like the places Grandma had threatened him with. It was bright, modern, focused on rehabilitation rather than just maintenance. Daniel's new physical therapist was optimistic about his prospects. With proper care and no more substances suppressing his system, he could make real progress. I found a small apartment nearby, using the money from Jade's father and my parents to pay 6 months up front. Aunt Steph took a larger place across town. We were building new lives from scratch, but at least we were building them on our own terms. The first month in Seattle was an adjustment. I found work at another bookstore, started applying to colleges for the spring semester. I visited Daniel 3 times a week, watching him slowly reclaim his body. He took his first assisted steps on a Tuesday afternoon, and we both cried. Jade visited every other weekend, taking the train from Portland. We were rebuilding too, learning who we were after trauma had reshaped us. Some nights we just held each other, not talking, letting proximity heal what words couldn't reach. But Grandma's shadow stretched even to Seattle. The first sign was subtle, a new patient at Daniel's facility who asked too many questions about him. Then came familiar faces at my bookstore, people who looked like they'd stepped out of Grandma's prayer circle. They never approached me directly, just watched. Marcus kept me updated on the legal proceedings. Grandma's trial was set for December. She was still on bail, still claiming religious persecution. Some of her church members had started a legal fund for her defense. She was painting herself as a martyr, a godly woman persecuted for trying to protect her disabled grandson. The watching increased. I started seeing the same cars outside my apartment, outside the facility when I visited Daniel. They were careful, staying just within legal boundaries, building a case for something maybe, or just trying to intimidate me into coming back. I refused to let fear control me again. I varied my routines, installed security cameras, carried pepper spray. Jade taught me basic self-defense during her visits. Aunt Steph checked in daily. We built our own network to counter Grandma's. 3 months into our Seattle life, Daniel achieved a breakthrough. He managed to speak his first words since the accident. No, the speech therapist said it was just the beginning. The substances had suppressed his recovery for years, but his brain was remembering how to form words. That night, I called Marcus with an idea. If Daniel could speak by the time of Grandma's trial, his testimony would be devastating, not filtered through a communication board or interpreted by others. His own voice telling his own story. Daniel embraced the challenge. He worked with the speech therapist for hours each day, pushing through frustration and setbacks. Each new word was a victory. Yes, stop, help. Simple words that meant everything. But someone must have been reporting back to Grandma about his progress. The attack came on a Thursday evening. I was walking from the bus stop to my apartment when 2 men stepped out of a van. Different men than before, but the same energy. Grandma's foot soldiers doing her dirty work. This time I was ready. The pepper spray hit the first man directly in the eyes. He screamed, clawing at his face. The second man grabbed my arm, but Jade's lessons kicked in. I stomped his instep, drove my elbow into his solar plexus. He doubled over, gasping. I ran, but not in panic like before. I ran straight to the police station 4 blocks away, burst through the doors yelling for help. This time there were witnesses. A woman walking her dog had seen the attempted grab and called 911. The men were arrested trying to flee in their van. Inside, police found zip ties, a taser, and printed directions to a house Grandma's supporters had rented outside the city. The evidence was overwhelming. The investigation revealed a network of Grandma's followers who'd been planning to kidnap me and deprogram me from my unnatural lifestyle. They had similar plans for Daniel, to remove him from the facility and return him to family care. Grandma had been careful to keep her name off everything, but the connections were clear. This time, the charges stuck. Conspiracy to commit kidnapping, stalking, attempted assault. Grandma's bail was revoked. She spent the next 3 months in jail awaiting trial. Her network of supporters finally disrupted. With Grandma locked up, Daniel's progress accelerated. By November, he could speak in short sentences. His walking improved too. Still assisted, but stronger each day. The therapist started talking about independent living possibilities within a year. I got accepted to the University of Washington for spring semester. Jade decided to transfer to Portland State just just a few hours away. We started planning for an apartment together, a real future that Grandma couldn't touch. The trial began in early December. I testified first, detailing years of abuse disguised as religious duty. The prosecutor presented evidence of Grandma's schemes, the forged signatures, the drugging, the forced marriage plans. Even some of her former supporters testified, finally finding their consciences. But the most powerful moment came when Daniel took the stand. He walked in using just a cane, spoke clearly into the microphone. His testimony was halting but devastating. He described years of being drugged into compliance, of Grandma convincing him he was more disabled than he was, of being forced to sign documents while heavily sedated. She stole years of my life, he said, looking directly at Grandma, made me believe I was helpless. I wasn't her grandson, I was her prisoner. Grandma's defense crumbled. Her lawyer tried to argue diminished capacity due to age, religious delusion, anything to minimize her sentence. But the jury saw through it, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 15 years, eligible for parole in 7. As they led her away, Grandma turned to look at me one last time. Her eyes held no remorse, only rage that her plan had failed. I stared back, no longer the scared 16-year-old she'd tried to break. I was free, and she was the one in chains. After the trial, life settled into something approaching normal. Daniel moved into an assisted living apartment, hired his own caregivers, started taking college courses online. He was building the life that had been stolen from him. I started university, majoring in social work. My experiences had shown me how systems could fail vulnerable people, and I wanted to be part of the solution. Jade and I got our apartment, painted the walls colors Grandma would have hated. Mom and Dad visited once, awkwardly trying to rebuild some kind of relationship. I wasn't ready to forgive them entirely, but I let them take me to lunch, baby steps towards something healthier than what we'd had. On the anniversary of the failed wedding, Daniel and I went to the beach. He walked on the sand with just his cane, spoke in complete sentences about his plans for the future. We didn't talk about Grandma or what she'd tried to do to us. We just existed as cousins, family in the way we should have always been. That night, Jade and I cooked dinner together in our little kitchen. She'd hung string lights that made everything glow warm and soft. We danced to music Grandma would have called sinful, kissed like the world wasn't watching, built a life that was ours alone. The nightmares still came sometimes. I'd wake up thinking I was back in that house, cameras watching, dress hanging in the closet like a threat. But Jade would hold me until the shaking stopped, remind me that I was safe, that Grandma couldn't hurt us anymore. The nightmares weren't the worst part. The worst part was knowing Grandma still had 15 years to plan her revenge, 7 if she behaved herself in prison. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, convinced I heard her voice through the walls, then remember she was locked up 3 states away. Jade would pull me close, her warmth reminding me I was safe in our Seattle apartment, not trapped in that house with cameras watching my every move. 2 months after the trial, I was sorting mail when I found it. A letter with no return address, postmarked from the Women's Correctional Facility. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Grandma's precise handwriting. She'd found a way around the no-contact order by not signing it, but I recognized every loop and curve of her letters. The message was brief but chilling. She wrote about redemption, about how prison had given her time to reflect on her mistakes. She claimed she'd found a new understanding of God's plan, one that didn't require forcing anyone into marriage. The timing of Grandma's letter makes me wonder how she knew exactly when to send it. 2 months feels so calculated. How did she manage to write without signing it to get around the no-contact order? That's such a clever but creepy move. She wanted to make amends, to help Daniel and me heal from what she called a misunderstanding. At the bottom, she'd written the visiting hours for the prison. I showed the letter to Jade that evening. She read it twice, her face growing darker with each word. We both knew Grandma hadn't changed. This was another manipulation, another attempt to regain control. I fed the letter to our shredder and tried to forget about it, but more letters came, one every week, each more elaborate than the last. She wrote about the Bible study group she'd started in prison, about the women she was helping find their way to God. She included drawings of wedding dresses, claiming they were for the other inmates who dreamed of marriage. Each sketch looked suspiciously like the dress she'd bought for me. I stopped opening them after the 5th one. Jade suggested burning them, but I kept them as evidence in case we needed to strengthen the restraining order. They piled up in a box under our bed, Grandma's presence invading our home even from behind bars. Daniel called one afternoon while I was studying for midterms. His voice was stronger now, though he still spoke slowly and deliberately. He'd received letters too. His were different, filled with medical advice, diet plans, exercises she claimed would help his recovery. She'd even included contact information for specialists she'd researched from the prison library. The specialists were real, but when Daniel's care team looked into them, they discovered something disturbing. Each one had received letters from Grandma, introducing them to Daniel's case. She'd been building a new network from prison, reaching out to medical professionals who might be sympathetic to her cause. One doctor had already agreed to review Daniel's files, convinced by her story of a grandmother trying to help her disabled grandson. We reported everything to Marcus, who was still monitoring our case. He explained that Grandma had become something of a celebrity in certain religious circles. Some people saw her as a martyr, persecuted for trying to preserve traditional values. She was receiving donations for her commissary account, letters of support from strangers who believed her version of events. The realization that she was building power even from prison made my skin crawl. I started checking our apartment's locks obsessively, installed extra security cameras, varied my routes to campus even more than before. Jade found me one night arranging furniture to block the windows, convinced someone was watching us. 3 months into Grandma's sentence, her first parole hearing was scheduled. It was too early for release, but she could petition for transfer to a minimum security facility. The thought of her having more freedom, even within prison walls, terrified me. Daniel and I both submitted victim impact statements, but we couldn't attend in person. The risk of seeing her again was too great. She was denied the transfer, but the guard who delivered the news mentioned she'd taken it well, too well. She'd smiled and thanked the board for their time, said she understood she needed to prove herself further. The guard said she'd seemed almost pleased by the denial, like it was part of some larger plan. A week later, I was leaving my social work internship when I noticed her, a woman about Mom's age, standing across the street with a camera. She wasn't trying to hide, just standing there openly photographing me. When I started walking toward her, she didn't run. She waited until I was close enough to see her face clearly, then handed me a business card. The card identified her as a documentary filmmaker working on a project about families torn apart by religious extremism. She wanted to interview me about my experience, to share my story with the world. She promised complete anonymity, said my story could help other girls trapped in similar situations. She'd already interviewed several of Grandma's supporters who painted her as a hero. I tore up the card in front of her and walked away, but she followed. She kept talking about the importance of sharing truth, about how silence only protected abusers. She said Grandma was using her imprisonment to spread her message, that someone needed to counter her narrative. She offered money, promised to donate part of the proceeds to organizations helping abuse survivors. The offer was tempting for exactly 3 seconds. Then I remembered Grandma's letters, her ability to twist any situation to her advantage. This filmmaker might be genuine, but any documentary would give Grandma exactly what she wanted: attention, a platform, the chance to play victim on a larger stage. I told the woman to leave me alone and caught the next bus home, but she wasn't the only one who'd found me. Over the next month, I was approached by 3 different journalists, 2 podcast producers, and a woman claiming to represent a publishing house interested in my story. Each one had a different angle: religious trauma, family dysfunction, LGBTQ rights, but they all wanted the same thing. They wanted me to make Grandma famous. Jade and I started taking different routes home, sometimes spending nights at Aunt Steph's place across town. Daniel was getting similar attention. One podcaster had somehow gotten his direct number, called during his physical therapy session. The stress was affecting his recovery. His speech started regressing, his hands shaking more than they had in months. I knew we couldn't keep running forever. Grandma had found a way to hunt us even from prison, using her newfound supporters as proxies. Every journalist who approached us was doing her work, whether they knew it or not. She was trying to force us into the spotlight, knowing that attention would give her power. The solution came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Henderson, who'd apologized to me in the bookstore months ago, sent a letter through Marcus. She'd been following the media attention, saw how Grandma was manipulating the narrative. She wanted to help, but not publicly. She couldn't risk her standing in the community, but she had information we might find useful. I met her at a coffee shop downtown, both of us nervous about being seen together. She slid a folder across the table, her hands shaking slightly. Inside were financial records, emails, documents she'd collected over years of being in Grandma's inner circle. The evidence showed Grandma had been planning the forced marriage for years before Daniel's accident. She'd researched states with cousin marriage laws, consulted lawyers about guardianship, even investigated fertility treatments. But the most damning evidence was a series of emails from before Daniel's accident. Grandma had been corresponding with a group that promoted arranged marriages within families, sharing strategies for maintaining control over adult children. She'd written about her disappointment in Daniel's lifestyle, his refusal to settle down with a nice Christian girl. The accident had been an opportunity, not a tragedy. Mrs. Henderson also revealed that Grandma had been planning similar arrangements for other grandchildren. My younger cousins, still in middle school, were already being groomed for future matches. She'd kept files on each family member, documenting their weaknesses, their pressure points. The forced marriage between Daniel and me was meant to be just the beginning. I took the evidence to Marcus, who immediately saw its value. This wasn't just about protecting Daniel and me anymore. Other children were at risk. The prosecutor who'd handled Grandma's trial was interested, but she warned me that using the evidence might attract even more media attention. Grandma would spin it as persecution, claim the documents were fabricated. Daniel and I discussed it over video call that night. He was in his apartment, finally living independently with just a few hours of aid support each day. He'd worked so hard for this freedom, and now Grandma threatened it even from prison. But he was adamant. We had to protect the younger cousins. He couldn't let what happened to us happen to them. We decided to handle it quietly. Instead of going public with the documents, we shared them with specific family members, the parents of the younger cousins Grandma had been targeting. Most were horrified. They'd trusted Grandma, never imagining she'd extend her control to their children. A few accused us of lying, but the evidence was too detailed to dismiss. One by one, family members started limiting contact with Grandma. Her prison visitation list shrank. The letters of support slowed. The donations to her commissary account dwindled. She was being isolated, cut off from the network she'd spent years building. It was a different kind of prison, one she'd created for herself. But Grandma had one more card to play. 6 months into her sentence, she filed a civil lawsuit against me. She claimed I defamed her, destroyed her reputation with false accusations. She was representing herself from prison, using the law library to build her case. She demanded damages for emotional distress, loss of familial relationships, and interference with her religious practices. The lawsuit was baseless, but it meant I'd have to respond. I'd have to engage with her again, even if only through legal documents. It was her way of forcing contact, of maintaining control. She knew I couldn't ignore a lawsuit, couldn't just walk away like I had from the journalists. Jade found a lawyer who agreed to handle the case pro bono. She specialized in protecting abuse survivors from retaliatory lawsuits. She'd seen this pattern before, abusers using the legal system to maintain contact with their victims. She filed a motion to dismiss, arguing the lawsuit was frivolous and violated the spirit of the no-contact order. The motion hearings meant I had to appear in court, though not in the same room as Grandma. She appeared via video link from prison, wearing her orange jumpsuit like a martyr's robe. She's representing herself from prison and filing lawsuits? That's quite the move. Using the law library to force contact when everything else failed. Makes me wonder what her real endgame is here, because this feels like desperation dressed up as strategy. She represented herself with surprising competence, citing cases and precedents. But when the judge asked for evidence of defamation, she had nothing but her own testimony. The judge dismissed the case and warned Grandma that further frivolous lawsuits could result in additional charges. Grandma smiled on the video screen, thanked the judge politely, and said she understood. As they ended the connection, she looked directly at the camera. Even through the screen, across miles of distance, her eyes found mine. She mouthed 3 words before the feed cut off. I knew what she'd said without needing to hear it. The same words she'd whispered when they'd led her away after the criminal trial. This wasn't over. It would never be over as long as she lived. She had 7 years minimum to plan, to scheme, to find new ways to reach us. But something had changed in me during those months of running, hiding, fighting off her proxies. I wasn't the scared 16-year-old who'd found a wedding dress in her size. I wasn't even the 18-year-old who'd fled to Seattle seeking safety. I was 20 now, studying to become a social worker, living with the woman I loved, building a life on my own terms. Daniel was thriving too. He'd started dating someone he met in an online support group, a woman who understood his journey. He was taking classes toward a degree in counseling, wanting to help others who'd been controlled and manipulated. His speech was clear now, his mobility improving every month. He'd reclaimed everything Grandma had tried to steal from him. The younger cousins were safe, their parents now vigilant against Grandma's influence. Mrs. Henderson had quietly shared warnings throughout the extended family and church community. Grandma's support network had crumbled, leaving her isolated in prison with only her obsession for company. A year into her sentence, the letters stopped coming. The journalists moved on to other stories. The documentary filmmaker found other subjects. Grandma's name faded from the religious blogs that had championed her cause. She became just another prisoner serving time for crimes that fewer and fewer people defended. I graduated with my bachelor's degree on a rainy May morning. Jade was there, of course, along with Aunt Steph and, surprisingly, both my parents. Mom had started therapy after the trial, finally processing her own relationship with Grandma. Dad was trying to, in his quiet way. They sat together but apart, their marriage another casualty of Grandma's control. Daniel walked across the stage at his own graduation ceremony 2 weeks later, using just a decorative cane he'd chosen himself. He'd invited me to watch him receive his associate degree, the first step toward his counseling license. His girlfriend sat beside me, both of us cheering when his name was called. He'd chosen to keep the Walker name, reclaiming it from the horror Grandma had tried to attach to it. That summer, Jade and I moved to a larger apartment closer to my new job at a family services agency. I'd be working with families in crisis, helping protect children from exactly the kind of abuse Daniel and I had suffered. My supervisor warned me about burnout, about the emotional toll of seeing my own trauma reflected in case after case. But I was ready. I'd survived Grandma. I could survive this too. The work was hard, but meaningful. Every safety plan I helped create, every child I helped protect, felt like a small victory against people like Grandma. I couldn't save my younger self, couldn't go back and find that wedding dress before it was hidden in the closet, but I could make sure other 16-year-olds had someone to turn to when their families betrayed them. Daniel started his counseling internship at a center for people with disabilities. He specialized in trauma resulting from caregiver abuse, using his own experience to connect with clients who'd been controlled by those supposed to protect them. We met for coffee once a month, comparing notes on our work, supporting each other through the difficult cases. 5 years into Grandma's sentence, I received notice of another parole hearing. This time, she had a real chance at early release. Good behavior, completed programs, letters of recommendation from prison staff who'd been charmed by her transformation. The parole board would need to hear from victims again. Daniel and I submitted new statements, detailing not just the original crimes, but the ongoing harassment from prison. We included evidence of the lawsuit, the letters, the network she'd tried to build from behind bars. We asked the board to consider not just her behavior in prison, but the likelihood that she'd resume her campaign of control if released. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I took the day off work, couldn't focus on anything except the phone, waiting for Marcus to call with the board's decision. Jade stayed home too, holding my hand as we watched the clock tick toward noon. The call came at 12:47. Parole denied. The board had determined that Grandma still posed a risk to her victims. She'd have to serve at least 2 more years before her next hearing. 2 more years of safety, of freedom, of building our lives without her shadow looming over us. That night, Jade and I celebrated quietly. We cooked dinner together in our kitchen, danced to music in our living room, made plans for our future. We talked about marriage, a real marriage based on love and choice, not manipulation and control. We discussed children, whether we wanted them, how we'd protect them from people like Grandma. Daniel called the next morning. He'd received a letter from one of our younger cousins, now in college herself. She thanked him for protecting her, for ensuring she never had to experience what we'd endured. She was studying pre-law, planning to become a prosecutor. She wanted to put people like Grandma away, to protect families from predators who hid behind religion and tradition. The cycle was breaking. Grandma had tried to create a legacy of control, passing her twisted values down through generations. Instead, she'd created a family of survivors, each of us determined to prevent others from suffering as we had. Her legacy would be the strength we'd found in fighting her, the lives we'd built in defiance of her plans. On the 7th anniversary of finding that wedding dress, I stood in front of a classroom full of social work students. I was a guest lecturer, sharing my experience to help them understand the complexity of family abuse. I didn't name Grandma, didn't give details that might identify her, but I told them about the wedding dress, about the cousin who couldn't speak for himself, about the family that chose compliance over protection. I told them about the escape, the recovery, the ongoing work of healing. I explained how abusers could maintain control even from prison, how victims needed support long after the immediate danger passed. I watched their faces change as they understood that the monsters in their textbooks were real people, living in real families, destroying real lives. After the lecture, a young woman approached me. She waited until the other students had left, then asked if we could talk privately. In my office, she told me about her own grandmother, about plans being made for her future, about a cousin who'd had an accident. The pattern was so familiar it made my chest tight. I gave her resources, connected her with services, helped her make a safety plan. I watched her leave with the same mixture of fear and determination I'd felt at her age, but she had something I hadn't, someone who believed her, someone who'd survived the same nightmare and could show her the way out. That evening, I came home to find Jade arranging flowers on our dining table. She'd bought them from the farmer's market, bright sunflowers that filled our apartment with color. We'd built a life full of small joys, everyday freedoms that felt miraculous after what we'd survived. Every choice we made for ourselves was a victory over Grandma's legacy of control. Daniel texted while we were eating dinner. He'd gotten engaged to his girlfriend, wanted us to be part of the wedding party. A real wedding, built on love and choice and mutual respect. Everything his wedding to me would never have been. I texted back my congratulations, genuinely happy for the life he'd built from the ruins of Grandma's plans. As I lay in bed that night, Jade sleeping peacefully beside me, I thought about the girl I'd been at 16, the girl who'd found a wedding dress and thought death was her only escape. She'd been wrong. There had been another way out, harder and longer, but ultimately more satisfying. I'd not only survived, I'd built a life that honored everything Grandma had tried to destroy. The nightmares still came sometimes, but less frequently. The wedding dress no longer haunted my dreams. When I woke in the dark, I didn't hear Grandma's voice or feel her presence. I heard Jade's breathing, felt the solid walls of our apartment, saw the life we'd chosen reflected in every corner of our home. Grandma had 2 more years before her next parole hearing. 2 years to plan, to scheme, to dream of regaining control. But I had 2 years too. 2 years to grow stronger, to help more families, to build an even better life with Jade. 2 years to prepare for whatever she might try next, because I knew she would try again. It was who she was, as fundamental to her nature as breathing, but it was no longer who I was. I wasn't her granddaughter, her victim, her property. I was Sophie, social worker, partner, survivor. I was free, and that freedom was worth every fight it had taken to win it. Thanks for joining me on this little curiosity trip. I had a blast diving into all these weird and fascinating questions with you. Until next time, keep wondering. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.